With the news of Himiko Nova being reliant on the Astral Express members, many people will immediately think about Sunday, and whether he has a place in her teams. And while I'm certain many will use him, the truth is that Sunday has historically not been treated well in the meta, and I expect things to be no different until he receives a Novaflare. Now I'm aware many people really enjoy using Sunday, and will try to fit him in teams no matter the result. So before anything, I'd like to emphasize that this will be a meta discussion, which obviously doesn't factor personal preferences. But let's get the main question out of the way first. How good is Sunday nowadays? And unfortunately, I've got to say that Sunday has probably ended up in the most unfortunate situation that we've seen from an HSR support, as he was intentionally made to not work with his niche, and has multiple free units outperforming him. More specifically, his lack of synergy with any Remembrance character besides Aglaia, with even that synergy being shaky at best, led to him largely losing his spot in his intended team. Then as a generalist buffer and action advancer, currently there are no instances where he outperforms Sparkle after her Novaflare, or RMC if played well. But what makes it so hard to write off Sunday's performance is that he's consistently one of the stronger alternative options for a team, which makes team building much easier. Furthermore, when teams needed to wait for their best-in-slot supports to release, Sunday often found himself as one of their best options for a limited time. This was the case for Anaxa Hypercarry until Saridra and Cyrene dropped, then for Phainon until Sparkle got her Novaflare, and most recently with Ashvale Hypercarry until Mortonak's Blade was released. Because of all these things, while his general strength is extremely low in the meta, it's very possible that he still found use on your account. But the truth is, if you're not a best-in-slot option for any team in Star Rail, you are not a strong character in the meta. But why does he struggle so much to find a team where he excels? Well, I can think of countless reasons. Well, if it comes down to how little he provides, considering how much you need to work around him. For example, because he advances your character to his exact AV, you're heavily incentivized to have a -1 speed setup between your carry and Sunday. But in doing so, you force to take off an offensive main stat from your boots in favor of speed. On top of that, Sunday's damage amp, especially if you lack a summon, is very mediocre for today's standards. And then you compare that to someone like Sparkle, who lets you keep offensive main stats on your carry, has far greater damage amp that's more in line with modern standards, and has higher quality of buffs through the Res Pen, SP generation, and better utilization of light cones like DDD. And you realize that Sunday has simply been outclassed. But that isn't even the worst part, as -1 speed setups are starting to really show their age as endgame continues to adapt. This is because there have been multiple new enemies and debuffs that easily mess up your team's action order, which -1 speed setups cannot work around. Whether you're action advanced from fights like Lygus, Sparxicon, and Dark Sam, or getting action delayed from the interference debuff and Anomaly Arbitration, the truth is that -1 speed setups are extremely crippled in these scenarios. Because of this, it's become very apparent how inflexible these comps are. It's for this reason that out-of-turn action advances continue to get stronger and stronger, since they provide far more control. Now for an advancer like RMC, the concept of them being easily controllable may not be your first thought, and they're admittedly far harder to utilize than someone like Sunday. But for a player that's actively tracking mem charge and saving their ultimate to guarantee an advance for the right moment, you can utilize some of the power within -1 speed setups without their restrictions. Then for DDD, having the advance tied to the use of an ultimate allows you the flexibility to time the advance perfectly, hopefully bringing your team into the cycle. So when you're advanced or delayed by an enemy, something like DDD will still provide its full value, whereas -1 speed setups lack that flexibility. Not only that, but many characters have more synergy with out-of-turn action advances than a -1 speed setup. Funnily enough, the best example of a kit like that would actually be Aglaia, the character that should be Sunday's best team. And while Sunday is definitely still a strong option for Aglaia, her extremely high speed will often make it impossible to have Sunday and Aglaia perfectly speed-tuned for each other throughout the entire fight. Because of this, Aglaia's kit flows far better with out-of-turn action advances like DDD on Tribi, or Meb Advance from RMC, since those are far more controllable. Meanwhile, Sunday restricts your speed tuning heavily, and will often desync with Aglaia if the fight takes long enough. And on the topic of RMC, we can talk about what's possibly the worst part of Sunday, how every alternative option is just better than him these days. Now specifically for RMC, this comes with a caveat that you can efficiently use their action advances, which admittedly isn't nearly as easy as just pressing skill on Sunday and calling it a day. However, for those who are willing to put in the extra effort, RMC is almost always stronger than Sunday. Now there are many reasons for this, like their action advance being out of turn, their true damage buff being far more valuable than Sunday's, and how well RMC synergizes with other sources of action advances, or specific team members. And then for Sparkle, I've already talked about how her damage amp is just strictly better than Sunday. But funnily enough, her action advance only being 50% has ended up increasing her longevity. This is because she doesn't encounter any of the problems that -1 speed setups deal with, alongside having good synergy with DDD, which Sunday comps lack. And even worse than all that is that these two characters that I've continuously described as being stronger than him have technically been free at one point or another. So the fact that this limited support cannot beat free characters in almost any scenario makes his place in the meta that much lower. And when we get into the discussion of how he compares to other limited supports, almost every modern generalist ends up a stronger choice, simply because they buff far more, and actually contribute to the team's damage. So if he can't really stand out as a summon support, beyond Jing Yuan, who is far from a meta DPS, can't beat free characters in being a hypercarry buffer, and doesn't even come close to modern generalists, the fact that meta players call Sunday homeless starts to make a lot of sense. But as I've stated before, Sunday is a weird case where it's hard to fully discredit the guy, since there have been many instances in the meta where he's found use, even though it feels like the devs intentionally tried to screw him over. First, they intentionally made his kit not work with the premium Remembrance team, but he still found use with hypercarries. Then they gave these hypercarries dedicated supports, but he still found use as an alternative option. And now they've pushed him away as a strong alternative option for a lot of these teams, but he's still hanging on by a thread in very specific scenarios. In every position that he was great in, the devs have done everything in their power to push him out of relevance, but there are still some scenarios where he can find a place in certain accounts. For instance, while I previously stated RMC usually outperforms Sunday, the Trailblazer is often the most sought after support in any account. This is because many teams don't just want the Trailblazer, but need them for their team to properly function. As such, every character that serves as an alternative to the Trailblazer inherently has higher value, and Sunday can sometimes fulfill that role for RMC. Now that obviously doesn't mean you can use Sunday to replace RMC in an Evernight carry team, for example, as what RMC provides mechanically to that team cannot be fulfilled by him. But using him to replace RMC in your Himiko Nova comp is entirely viable. But many people view his real competition to be Sparkle after her Novaflare, which is an entirely different story from RMC. And the sad truth is that, unless we're talking specifically about Jing Yuan, Sparkle is just strictly better than Sunday now. But strangely enough, while you'd always choose Sparkle if forced to pick between the two, there are actually a lot of cases where you don't need to choose, you just run both. This is because Sparkle's Novaflare not only made her stronger than Sunday, but also gave her synergy with Sunday. Now that synergy mostly stems from two factors, Sparkle's action advance being 50%, and Sparkle's buffs lasting for 2 turns. Because of this, Sparkle can advance your DPS before Sunday, and Sunday can proceed to advance them again afterwards, with neither of their buffs losing uptime. As such, this duo is very effective at giving a DPS frequent actions and energy, which has found a lot of strong use cases. More specifically, this duo was best in slot with Asheville Hypercarry until Mortonak's Blade released, and has more recently found play in Welt Hypercarry comps. But I'd like to bring special attention to Phainon, who happens to be a very strong user of this core. Now there are a few caveats with this, since this duo is only strong as Saridra Z0, and if you aren't playing the Cyrene variant of Phainon teams of course. But if you are stuck with E0 Saridra on your Phainon team, the comp of Phainon, Saridra, Sparkle, and Sunday can sometimes be your best team. Now Sunday may not provide buffs that Phainon cares much about, but what he does provide is the highest core flame generation out of any support. Because of this, Phainon will be able to get his ultimate after each of your teammates have acted, meaning you do not need to rely on hit RNG for core flame generation. This allows you to get into his transformation very early into the fight, dramatically lowering the possibility of your team dying. And lastly, we've got Himiko Nova, the DPS that many people believe will get Sunday off the bench. And while you very easily could use Sunday with Himiko Nova, it's far harder to conclude whether he's best in slot. And much of the reason why stems from Sunday's constant competitor, RMC. Now for specifically Himiko Nova, a lot of the best runs will use RMC over Sunday, since there's far more room to optimize them. Furthermore, RMC has much better synergy with Himiko's other teammate options, whereas Sunday only synergizes with Sparkle and Dipped, who are strong teammates for Himiko, but not typically best in slot. And most importantly, Himiko's premium sustainless team, Arm C, Morton Axe Blade, and Welt, is a very synergistic core that allows you to switch Himiko's mode on demand, alongside running 2 pseudo-sustains. Because of this, most of the best clears will be using this specific team, considering it's very cost efficient and allows the most skill expression. But for how I expect most people to play Himiko Nova, the team of Sparkle, Sunday, and Dipped will be a very strong team, and one where Sunday actually isn't holding the team back. So yes, Sunday is basically never best in slot when the discussion is focused on meta, and that is much of the reason why a lot of this video paints him in a negative light. But there are some contexts where he's a strong option. Though there's another aspect of Sunday that makes him a weird character to discuss, and that's because it feels like his Novaflare is right around the corner. Now this could just be wishful thinking, but with all of his involvement in Planar Arcadia's story, how Himiko Nova's kit works, and how weak his kit is nowadays, I feel quite confident that he's next. And bringing this up is actually important when discussing his place in the meta, because his kit could be very strong, it just needs a clear direction. But if they manage to give him that direction, alongside cleaning up some of the clunky parts of his kit, he has the potential to be one of the strongest supports in the game. The immediate impact that his Novaflare would have on Aglaea, and more importantly, Himiko Nova, could be very large. But for this very same reason, it's quite difficult to assess Himiko Nova's future value. As things are right now, it's very easy to see that Himiko Nova will be version 4's rendition of Phainon, a hypercarry that has extremely strong early vertical, but fairly mediocre teammate options. But the high likelihood of Sunday becoming the uncontested best in slot for Himiko after a Novaflare could increase her pull value for everyone who already owns Sunday, which is a very large number of accounts. But unfortunately, we have no clue when the next Novaflare is, and it's far too big a gamble to grab Himiko Nova simply because you already have Sunday. And on another note, Sunday is one of the only modern supports that doesn't have a notable early Eidolon, or really any impressive Eidolon for that matter. So Novaflare would not only fix this issue, but could also extend Himiko Nova's shelf life beyond her own Eidolons. But in other words, while Sunday is a fairly unremarkable character in the meta right now, there is a very strong chance things will change relatively soon, since there are far too many things pointing towards Sunday getting Novaflared. And now we finally reach the final question. Should you use Sunday? Well, I'll just be blunt here and say that you'd ideally avoid using him in your teams right now. Now that isn't to say that Sunday is unplayable or that you can't clear with him, but more so that you should be shooting towards the best in slot version of your teams. These days, Sunday is exclusively played as an alternative option when you can't run the best in slot support. But the truth is that with supports like Tribi, Morton Axe Blade, and Sparkle in the game, Sunday is rarely even in the top 3 best alternatives to a best in slot choice. And while there are situations where he's strong, possibly even the best alternative on your account, those are typically very few cases. Not to mention, even in these scenarios, oftentimes the best next step for their account is to grab the best in slot support so that you can drop Sunday in the team. But I'm very aware that Sunday is a fan favorite for many HSR players, and some will run him whether he's best in slot or not. So the better question is, do you want to play Sunday? When it comes to Sunday, it gets really hard to keep a balanced perspective on him, especially considering how the meta has treated him recently. But I always try to provide as much nuance to a discussion as I can, and I hope I managed to accomplish that with this video. But speaking of that, I'd like to thank Duck for inspiring this video in the first place, as I was already quite interested in making character-specific videos in the future, and this was a great excuse to try it out. And if you like this, let me know of any future characters you'd be interested in me covering. Anyways though, bye-bye!